Hi, this is Glenn Livingston, and what you're about to hear is an audio about telling stories using stories to sell. It was an audio not made specifically for coaches, but because the Easy Coach marketing system relies on bonding with your clients in a regular way by sending out audios and articles and stories from your personal life, I thought it was particularly important for you to hear this audio about how stories really bypass sales resistance and get clients to do what they need to do if you're offering something that's genuinely valuable to them. So without further ado, here's the interview that I did with Terry Dean about using stories to sell. Thanks.
Hello, this is Terry Dean, and I'm here with Dr. Glenn Livingston. How are you today, Glenn?
I'm very good. Looking forward to talking to you.
What we're going to talk about on this audio is we're going to talk about storytelling sales secrets. We're going to be revealing how stories work in sales copy on websites, how they're used by big brands and small brands alike. We're going to show you how sales stories basically bypass the person's natural skepticism about your offer, and they take them right into the emotional touch. It basically goes right to the heart of the person to make the sale.
I thought that rather than being didactic with this, I thought that maybe it would be helpful if we talked about a couple of things that we had actually purchased because of a good story. And as the users are listening, maybe they could think about some stories that got them to buy as well. I know that for me, that's what really drove the point home and helped me to use it in my own selling. So would that be okay?
It definitely would. Let's talk about some of those stories. I like to talk about buying.
I like to talk about buying also. Marketers like to buy stuff. I was thinking about when I first came online, and when I first came online, I was basically broke, so I didn't have a lot of money, so it took a lot to get me to buy stuff. And one of the first things that I bought was Perry Marshall's AdWords course. And Perry had this story about the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers who invented flight and designed the first airplane. And what he said was that most people didn't know was that at the time in the early 1900s, late 1800s, there was a lot of other people trying to crack the flying nut. And those included really powerful people like Alexander Graham Bell, the president of the Smithsonian Institution, and some other very high-profile inventors and researchers. And what differentiated the Wright brothers, made them successful as compared to Alexander Graham Bell and the Smithsonian Institution guy and the other people that were really trying hard and putting a lot of money into it, was that all the other guys were focusing on the engine. They were trying to build a more powerful engine that would be strong enough to get the plane off the ground. And the Wright brothers said, no, we're going to focus on the plane. They built the plane as a glider first so that they would crack the nut of the aerodynamic design. And once the aerodynamic design was working, then they added the power. See, what they understood was that the wings were more important than the engine. And Perry's analogy, which I was on the cusp of making this leap myself, which is also something, Terry, that you and I talk about is really very important, is that the conversion of your website, which corresponds to the glider. Do you have the dynamics of your website down so you can turn visitors into dollars? Can your website fly at all? That's a lot more important than the engine, which is the traffic. And as a matter of fact, what all these other guys were having trouble with, as compared to the Wright brothers, was if you put too powerful an engine onto a plane which is not aerodynamically designed well, that engine is just going to blow the plane apart. And similarly, if you put too much traffic into a web business which is not designed well to convert, that's going to blow your website apart. It's like going to a waterfall with a leaky bucket. You don't bring much home with you and you get all wet. What I came to realize, and which is really something that's driven home to me in the last couple of years as I've been coaching dozens and getting to look at hundreds of business conversion systems, is that everybody thinks they've got a traffic problem. Everybody thinks they've got a traffic problem, but what they really have is a conversion problem, and they should be doing what the Wright brothers did, which is to focus on building a system which turns visitors into dollars better than everybody else. And that's how Perry Marshall got me to buy his first AdWords book and kind of learned how he thought systematically about business and web systems the same way that an engineer would think about an airplane, or Perry's case, he was actually an engineer and he built stereo systems. So, Perry, do you want to say anything about that story and what principles you think worked well in that story? And I don't know if there's any way you would have done it better.
What I like about the story is the fact that we're going back to a history that everybody knows. So that's a fact, okay? The fact that the Wright brothers invented the airplane, that's a fact that we all know. You're hooking something that everybody already knows is a fact into what you're trying to convince them. So you're hooking a fact with the convincing, and that makes whatever it is that you're trying to share much more powerful because they already know the first to be true. For example, there's many times on a website I've used the terms, as you already know, comma, and then go into a statement. Basically, that's just bringing in an agreement that you already know this fact. This is a fact, and then we're going to go into the next step.
Gotcha.
That's exactly what they're doing in the story also. We already know that that's a historical fact, so now he's going to talk about something else that we have to understand. And the second thing that I really like about the story is we already know that in this overall market, in the online space, most people think that they have a traffic problem. That's what they're always looking for, is they're looking for cheaper traffic.
Right.
And so he's using the story basically to let us know that everybody is looking for the traffic, but just like if you go back in history, in that fact, all these other people trying to develop the airplane were looking in the wrong place also.
I totally agree. And Terry, I think the third thing about this story, which was really brilliant, was that it's a fact that everybody knows ushered in a new era. It created a new infrastructure that built society to a new level. All of a sudden, man was not constrained to the ground anymore. What's more common than a small business entrepreneur trying to get off the ground? And so what he's kind of subtly saying here, bypassing the sales censor, is, look, you need to think about things in a totally different paradigm. You're focusing on entirely the wrong thing. If you want to get your business off the ground, then you need to think about conversion. You shouldn't be thinking so much about traffic and the engine. You're just going to repeat what these really smart people did. See, he's kind of saving you at the same time. He's showing you what the next step is without humiliating you, without making you feel stupid for what you're doing because, hey, people as smart as Alexander Graham Bell and the president of the Smithsonian Institution were going down the same route itself. It really took an innovation of the Wright brothers to put it together. I think it's a fact that people already knew, but it was also a fact that was the game-changing fact, put it like that. Does it make sense?
Yes, it does.
Here's another story that actually created a new addiction for me. I heard a radio interview. There was some VP of marketing, I think it was, high up at Fiji Water. And I was on a long drive. I think I was driving home from New Hampshire or something. And he was talking about how they discovered Fiji Water. Now, I don't know if this is true or not, but it was a brilliant story. And apparently, this group of Americans were in Fiji, and the natives saw the Americans taking showers and baths the first thing in the morning. And they thought that was really strange. You might think, well, why would that be strange? But apparently, and this is what they said to the Americans, well, why do you wash your outsides before you wash your insides? And then they proceeded to explain, we always wash our insides out with our water first. They gave the Americans the exact right amount to accomplish this, and at the time, I don't think that Fiji Water came in the standard 1-liter bottles or half-liter bottles. I think that they crafted their packaging to support this story, which went along with the exact amount that the Fiji natives were telling the Americans was necessary to wash out your insides in the morning. And what they said was, it's like a shower for your insides. And that phrase just rung in my mind, and I thought, I really need to take a shower for my insides. I feel in some ways I feel a little stupid thinking about it back then, but it really resonated with me. And I was on a health kick at the time, and I was trying to detox, and I wanted more energy, and I wanted to feel healthier. And they really had my attention with that story. And then they went on to explain some of the unique properties of Fiji, which made it the ideal shower for your inside. So, for example, something to do with the underground aquifer that it came from meant that the mineral composition of the water created an alkaline environment in your body. And I knew that alkaline was healthy and acid was unhealthy for your body. You want to create an alkaline environment in your body. Now they really got me. I'm going to take a shower for my insides. I'm going to create this alkaline environment. This water is different than all the other mineral waters because not all the other mineral waters come from natural aquifer like the Fiji water does. Some of them are just bottled from a mountain spring or something like that, and they don't necessarily create this alkaline environment. They linked the story to a point of difference benefit. See? I was looking to be healthier. I understood that creating an alkaline environment was healthier. They figured out that they could link their story to a unique property of their water, which became a point of difference benefit in the market. And they had me, man. I mean, I actually bought a subscription. How many people do you know, Terry, who have actually bought a subscription to mineral water? Not many, right?
Not very many. I've never had one. I can at least say that so far.
I had a subscription until my wife said, honey, there's so many bottles of mineral water piling up in the garage, you have to stop.
So why weren't you drinking the mineral water?
I was, but I didn't adjust the subscription to the right amount. I was drinking it.
What I like about this story is the fact that a lot of companies would probably try to do is just make a chart of what makes their water different. Why our water is better than the competition and come down with a list. So they talk about the alkaline reaction in your body. They probably have a whole list of why does it create this difference in alkaline. And you know what that would do to most people? That would just confuse them. Even if they put it up, somebody who is as analytical as you, they might have put it up at some point, but you don't remember it. What you remember is the story.
Right. Stories bring facts to life. This took me forever to learn, Terry, but you can't sell with constipated content. You need to bring the content to life in order to get people's attention and rivet them to your story and rivet them to the facts and why those facts are important to them and why should they exchange their hard-earned money for the benefit that you can provide.
And the moment you go in to start talking about why you're different, why your water is better than the competitors, we all know that you're selling us. Even if we're listening, we're at least turning off one ear at that point. We're not listening to everything you're selling because that sales resistance comes up. But when you tell the story, it becomes, well, that's interesting. We could even say that you're sneaking in your strongest point of difference benefit right there in the story.
Well, I think the other thing we need to remember, Terry, is that from an evolutionary perspective, Homo sapiens are a few million years old, I think, but writing and intellectual recording of facts and presentation of facts, that's maybe 15,000 years old at most. And so we're wired to learn and remember stories. Stories are really the fabric of society. It's what we're wired to pay attention to. And that took me forever to understand as well.
If we go back to the original writings are all stories. That's what they wrote about, were stories.
It's true.
Let's say that we go to the Bible. What is the Bible mostly teaching in? The Bible's teaching in stories.
Stories and parables.
There's stories and parables that said that Jesus only spoke in parables to people. In the Bible, we could say that Jesus only told stories.
Right. And that's probably the most successful story ever told, right?
We could see that he was teaching by a story. You go through other religions as well. Any of their books, what are they in? They're stories.
Look at the popularity of movies. I mean, how is it possible that a movie star can get $20 million for a movie? It's because they act out a story well, and that's what our culture values. That's what rivets people's attention. That's what conveys a message most effectively. That's what sells.
It is. They make you believe the story. They make you feel like you're there. That's the other thing we should mention in a movie. A really good movie isn't just telling a story off in a distance. You realize that a really good movie puts you in the movie. You can feel like it's happening now.
Right. I recently, as I've been practicing storytelling in my selling, I've been telling stories on my blog, and one of the first stories that I told in a little video while I was showing the words going by, and I got comments on the blog that said, "Glenn, stop interrupting the story." I was interrupting the story to give them this annoying information about how they could sell with it. I was bothering them by telling them how to make money. They wanted to hear the story instead.
Can I tell you something interesting? I had a client, this was at least a few weeks back, but they told me that, you know what, Glenn has become amazing at stories in his blog. I can't stop listening to whatever Glenn says.
That's really cool.
And it's because of the storytelling that you have. You've always had great content, but it's probably just in the past you've really become good at the stories and sharing the content in the stories, and it makes that connection that you pretty much couldn't make any other way.
Well, it's probably once we recorded the storytelling module of the Total Conversion Code, I really understood the structure of selling with stories, and I decided to make a concerted effort to practice with it.
This is something else I want people to take a look at. The next movie you watch, make an effort, even bring a little notebook. So hopefully this isn't one that's going to just grab you and totally keep your attention all the way through. Maybe make this the second time you watch a movie. So you've seen it once, you watch it the second time. I want you to watch for all the product placements in a movie. And if you watch for that in any movie, you'll quickly realize how powerful stories are, because you'll see all types of product placements come through the movie, because companies have found by inserting their product into a story that you can feel the emotion. So in other words, you're feeling the love in this story. You're feeling the excitement that's going on in this story, in this movie, that you will attach that feeling to their product by then placing it in the movie.
Yeah. What people don't understand about branding is often given a bad name in direct marketing circles, but when you're talking about products that are available in stores where people are going to pass 6 different rolls of toilet paper and they have to choose one, the one that makes them feel the love actually does have an advantage, and brands have figured that out. They're not as big and dumb and stupid as everybody says they are. So I've got one more story. As soon as I was old enough to purchase a gym membership myself, I believe it was in college, maybe shortly thereafter, I bought a membership to Jack LaLanne, which then became Bally's, and I think it's now extinct. But Jack LaLanne was a very famous elderly athlete and entrepreneur. And he was always doing these crazy physical stunts, and basically the purpose of the stunts were to get attention and prove that disciplined exercise kept you young, energetic, and healthy. For example, when he was 40 years old, he swam the whole length of the Golden Gate Bridge. And the next year, he swam from Alcatraz, where the prison is, over to Fisherman's Wharf. And at 43, he did the same thing, but this time he towed a 2,500-pound cabin cruiser. Then when he was 60, he repeated that, except this time he was handcuffed and shackled, and he was towing another cabin cruiser. When he was 66, he towed 77 people in 10 boats for over a mile in less than an hour. And at 80 years old, he towed 80 boats with 80 people in them. He became a perfect aspirational model for me. I wanted to be like Jack LaLanne. I decided that I didn't like this aging thing. I wanted to turn into a healthy old man. I was going to tow 80 people when I was 80 years old also. And as soon as I was old enough to buy a subscription, I was a member. I believe I kept that membership up for about 15 years until their gym wasn't around anymore. And I would think to myself, if Jack LaLanne can do it as such an old man, imagine what his workouts will do for me at 20, 21 years old.
That's a strong story because look at what you said there. You said if he can do it, then I can do it also. That's what you're saying because there's always two sells that we have to make when we're selling a product. The first sell is we have to convince people that whatever the benefit is that we're offering can be done, and it's happened. And that's where you see a lot of testimonials and case studies and things like that come in to prove that whatever the goal is can be accomplished, such as getting fit. That's the first goal. The fact, hey, this person became so fit they could tow 80 boats. That's the first one, that somebody could do it. But the second sell that you have to make with every product, and this is a harder sell, is that it will work for them. And so look at what you said. He did it when he was 80 years old. I can definitely do this because I'm not anywhere near 80.
Right. Not only if he could do it, I could do it, but if he could do it, it's going to work even better for me. That's what he did so well. So he was not only an aspirational model, but I thought, hey, he started when he was 40. I'm going to start when I'm 20.
And so that's why the story has so much power there, is you always have to think about that second sell that's going on is, can these people do it as well? That's something to think about with your stories, that as people are listening to your story, they're immediately going to be looking for if you had advantages over them. That's something they're going to look for in the story, and especially in a product like this. If he was a 20-year-old and let's say that he won the Mr. Olympia championship, would that story even affect you?
Right.
At that point in time, because you'd be immediately saying, well, I don't have his genetics. That's the first thing you'd say.
Right.
Well, I can't do that. I can't do it because I don't have his advantages. But if it came the other way, he made sure he had a disadvantage.
Now, this is a problem that I had in my personal sales funnel, because even though I went through the fire and reemerged, I totally crashed and burned, and I lost $2 million, and I went up $700,000 in debt, and I reemerged from that, people would still say, well, Glenn's a brainiac. Glenn has a PhD, and he consulted for all these corporations, and he's married to a brilliant marketer, and he's got all these advantages. I could never do that. That was kind of a big problem that I had in building my sales funnel around my personal story. If I had it to do again, I probably would have told a different story. I probably would have spent more time talking about people that I coached to success to prove to people that they could do it for themselves rather than telling my own personal story. But que sera, sera.
And that's one of the reasons I always tell my story, because my last job was delivering the pizzas for a living. And that basically puts, hey, if I could do this, you can do it too, because I was at the bottom, and that's when I got desperate enough to come on the internet and basically learn everything I could about the internet from scratch, and take in information I had learned from other experts out there that weren't internet related, people such as Jay Abraham, who were in the direct response world. I took their information and came online with that. That just becomes an example. Hey, this is where I was. You can do this also, because I pretty much came here from nothing. And I like telling my whole story. And the funny thing is if I leave out my story, Glenn, my sales drop dramatically whenever I leave out and I forget to tell the story of where I've come from in the business, because I've been doing it so long. Now that I've been online more than 15 years, in the business, I sometimes forget about the stories. I sometimes forget where I was. Whenever I leave out the story, you can see the effect.
Yeah.
Here's the funny thing about telling the story as well. It can't be me just sitting there saying, hey, I was a pizza delivery driver. I really have to think about what it felt like back when I was a pizza delivery driver, and the pain and the desperation I felt. When I tell the story, the better I can think about where I was at the time, the better the story works.
It's like method acting, right?
It really is. And when you start thinking about the stories in marketing, that's when you find out why the actors and actresses are paid so much for their work. It's not necessarily easy to go back and even remember the feelings. Now, an actor, they have to create feelings they might never have had in the life because they're doing a different story. In my case, I find it even difficult to go back and feel the same feelings
right.
that I had at the time. So now we know why they're paid so well for what they do.
Especially when it's a painful story from your personal life, right?
It is.
That wasn't fun delivering pizzas, right?
It wasn't fun. It wasn't fun having creditors call me on the phone all the time. I mean, back at that time, I had a bunch of credit card debts, and we had the creditors who called pretty much day and night telling you that you had to pay them now. I remember even at one point in time, I had a creditor who called my dad. They actually told my dad, because, creditors don't always do things that are legal. They called my dad and told him that if we didn't pay him off soon, we were going to go to jail. Okay. And so he came like running over my house to tell me how upset he was about
Oh
this.
my God.
It's hard to go back to that point because it's not fun feelings.
Yeah.
Go back to there. I now live where I don't have any debts. I don't take any debts. Maybe if I buy a new vehicle and they're giving me an awesome deal, maybe an extra $1,000 rebate, I'll take a quick loan and pay it off as soon as I'm allowed to, like 10 days later. But I don't take any debts. So it's hard to go back and remember the stress and the pain of being under the debt.
But if you're going to tell the story, and this story is really in the hero's journey paradigm, right?
It really is.
You have to convey that pain. That's where so many of our prospects are. So many of our prospects are at that point where their dad is getting phone calls from creditors and they believe that they're the scum of the earth, and obviously they're not. We don't have any debtors' prisons, but you have to convey that so they can empathize and connect with you, and then they will take the journey with you to see how you might be able to help them solve that problem. If you don't convey that pain, then you don't make the connection.
You don't make the connection, and basically they don't feel the fact that you care about them and where they're at also if you don't make the connection.
Yeah.
So when you think about a story like Jack LaLanne's, always think about that in your own story. If we're telling some type of journey story, make sure that you let us know what the feelings were back then. You know, how did you feel? How was it? And do you realize you're doing the same thing? This is real interesting because I was looking at your emotional eating site the other day, Glenn, and Sharon's story matches this as well. Because we see all of Sharon's credibility, all the companies she's worked for there. But the very beginning of the letter tells a story that makes us identify with her.
Yeah. It talks about how she couldn't resist a buttered bagel and what's wrong with her, and that's all she could possibly think about, and she had all these other good things in her life, but the buttered bagel was taking over her life. She felt incredibly weak in the presence of the buttered bagel.
Even with all these other companies that she worked with, companies like Weight Watchers and the other ones that everybody knows are in the weight loss field, she still had the same problem that the person reading the website has.
It's an Achilles heel. Everybody looks at Superman and thinks that he's invulnerable, but what about kryptonite? Everybody looks at Spider-Man and thinks that he's perfect, but he's got all these moral conflicts inside, and that's part of what creates the empathy and identification. I've got just a couple more things to say about why these three stories work. Would that be okay, Terry?
Yes, it would.
Okay. We talked about the importance of presenting the aspirational model and creating the emotional identification and then taking them on the whole hero's journey with you. And the hero's journey is just one story. There's actually, well, in the Total Conversion Code, there's 8 stories that we present to people with fill-in-the-blank templates they can use to make them work. But one of the other elements of storytelling that I think is very important is that you show them the benefits, you don't tell them. So you're showing them the benefits of your product. You're painting a very vivid picture of what it's going to be like after they use your product. You're not necessarily telling them. So Jack LaLanne didn't say, my gym and workout program is going to make you feel confident, strong, accomplished, and powerful, right? He could have gotten up on a television commercial and say, hey, come work out at Jack LaLanne. You're going to feel so strong and confident and powerful. Instead, he showed me the results and gave me something to aspire to.
He did. If he actually just got on TV and say, you're going to be more confident, you're going to be more strong, you're going to be accomplished, and you're going to feel powerful, you realize that we throw out 4 of those immediately. The only one we might say is we might feel strong. That's the only thing he might be able to convince us just by telling us directly. But the rest of those benefits, the emotional benefits that hook on, he could only tell us through the story.
Because any rational person is going to say, why? Why should I believe you?
Mm-hmm. The only one of those that's rational is that you're going to feel strong.
Right. It's almost impossible to convey an emotional benefit with facts. Fiji Water didn't say, hey, my water is going to make you feel clean and healthy inside. They showed me how a whole culture thought that their water was so important, they developed an entire ritual which was the absolute reverse of what we were doing in America around it. They really engineered a behavioral reversal by presenting how a whole culture had it right and we had it wrong. And Perry Marshall didn't say, hey, you should get your site converting very profitably first, then worry about throwing heavy traffic at it later. Instead, he showed me a powerful example of a real breakthrough that occurred when someone was willing to approach a problem in a way that we all thought was ass backwards, but actually was the right way to do it. Which is why we continually say that people only think that they have a traffic problem. This is so hard to convince people of. Terry, I don't know what it's like with you, but everybody that I talk to just wants more traffic, more traffic, more traffic. Where do I get it cheap? I don't have enough traffic. I can't afford the traffic. And I tell them, that's right, you can't afford the traffic. Your problem isn't going out to find cheaper traffic. Your problem is figuring out how can you afford the traffic, and the way you afford the traffic is to make your site convert better. Much, much, much better. Thanks very much for your time and attention. If you'd like to find out more about taking your coaching to the next level, getting certified, and building the practice of your dreams, please visit becomearealcoach.com. 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 Thank you.